They didn't ask for his name. They didn't need to. In a world that constantly reminded Alexander Morgan of his otherness, being invisible sometimes felt like a blessing. Alexander sat alone in Trident Booksellers and Cafe, the autumn light filtering through Boston's historic Newbury Street windows, illuminating the untouched coffee before him. His published poetry collections might have earned critical acclaim, but here, waiting for yet another blind date arranged by his well-meaning sister, he was just another man dreading rejection. The scars ran deeper than anyone could see. In high school, the locker room had been a battlefield. The memory of bruised ribs and whispered slurs from the Vermont football team still haunted him. Even now at 32, success hadn't healed those wounds. Boston University professor, respected poet, mentor to many, yet somehow, relationships remained the battleground where he consistently surrendered. His fingers traced the worn cover of his notebook, filled with verses no publisher had seen. Words about longing and isolation that felt too raw for public consumption. Outside, Boston continued its relentless pace, students rushing between classes, tourists photographing colonial architecture, business people marching toward glass towers. Alexander had learned to navigate the city's rhythms while remaining somehow separate from them, an observer rather than participant. Sarah had texted 3 times already. "He's really great. Alex, please give him a chance." His sister meant well, but her optimism sometimes felt like naivety. Their childhood in rural Vermont hadn't prepared her for understanding what it meant to be different in spaces designed for conformity. Still, he'd promised to try. When Daniel Fitzgerald walked in, Alexander's breath caught involuntarily. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that spoke of boardrooms and influence. Daniel was CEO of Fitzgerald Tech Solutions, one of Boston's leading cybersecurity firms, and entirely too perfect to be his date. This was clearly a mistake. "You're Alexander Morgan," Daniel stated rather than asked, sliding into the seat opposite. His voice carried the polished edge of Connecticut privilege, yet something genuine sparkled in his eyes. "Your collection, Voices in the Silence, kept me awake for 3 nights straight." Alexander's surprise must have shown because Daniel smiled, then perfectly recited the opening stanza of Alexander's most personal poem, words about invisibility and longing that rarely registered with casual readers. When Daniel explained that Alexander's sister worked in his company's diversity and inclusion department, how she'd spoken of her brother's courage and talent with fierce pride, something shifted in the atmosphere between them. Their conversation flowed from literature to art, from childhood memories to professional battles. Daniel spoke of building his company from scratch after leaving a soul-crushing corporate job, of wanting to create technology that protected people rather than exploited them. Alexander shared the sanctuary he'd found in poetry after years of feeling silenced, how words became both shield and sword when the world offered neither protection nor weapon. By sunset, they were walking along Charles River, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, discussing how success and loneliness often walked hand in hand. The golden hour light softened the city's edges, casting long shadows across the water, where rowing teams practiced with synchronized precision. "My sister thinks she's quite the matchmaker," Alexander finally admitted, watching a leaf spiral down to the water's surface. Daniel's laughter came easily. "Perhaps we should let her believe she succeeded." For the first time in years, Alexander felt truly seen, not despite who he was, but because of it. The walls he'd built so carefully began to show the first hairline fractures. When we build walls to protect ourselves, we rarely consider that those same barriers might be keeping love at bay. Alexander's journey was just beginning, but already his heart was learning to hope again. Follow Heart Stories for more journeys of courage, love, and finding home in unexpected places. Spring bloomed in Boston, painting the city in hopeful hues that matched the cautious optimism growing between Alexander and Daniel. Their relationship deepened through moments that bridged their different worlds: quiet evenings, analyzing poetry in Alexander's Back Bay apartment, and sleek technology galas where Daniel proudly introduced Alexander as the brilliant poet who's teaching me to see words differently. Winter had melted away through dinners at hidden North End restaurants. weekend explorations of dusty bookshops, and late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. The careful distance Alexander maintained with previous partners gradually diminished with each shared confidence. Each revealed vulnerability. At the Museum of Fine Arts, standing before a Winslow-Homer seascape, Daniel tentatively reached for Alexander's hand, a simple gesture that felt revolutionary. Several patrons glanced their way, some with smiles, others with tightened lips. But Daniel never flinched, never loosened his grip. The painting before them depicted a solitary boat battling turbulent waves, an image that resonated with both men who had navigated their own storms. "I never thought I'd find someone who understands both the storm and the silence after," Daniel said quietly, his thumb tracing circles against Alexander's palm. What Alexander couldn't articulate was the fear constantly perched on his shoulder that loving him might cost Daniel everything he'd built. Fitzgerald Tech Solutions was expanding into markets across the Midwest, regions where traditional values often governed business relationships. The mathematics of love rarely calculated risk so precisely. After a board meeting where expansion plans were discussed, Daniel returned uncharacteristically quiet. Alexander prepared himself for the inevitable conversation about discretion, about keeping their relationship private to protect business interests. Instead, Daniel showed him the presentation slides that prominently featured the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion, with references to Daniel's own journey toward authentic leadership. "They need to know who they're doing business with," Daniel explained, loosening his tie. "All of who I am." The gesture moved Alexander deeply. Previous relationships had always positioned his identity as something to be managed, accommodated, or hidden. Daniel's refusal to compartmentalize his life represented a form of courage Alexander hadn't encountered before. Memorial Day had arrived with its traditional Boston Common concert. The afternoon sun warmed the crowded park as families spread blankets across the grass. Daniel and Alexander found a spot beneath an elm tree, shoulders touching as the orchestra played patriotic classics. When Daniel casually draped his arm around Alexander's shoulders, an older man nearby muttered something about flaunting lifestyles in a family space. Daniel turned, his voice firm but controlled. "My grandfather died at Normandy fighting for freedom. I'm honoring him by living freely. Perhaps you could honor those who served by practicing the tolerance they defended." The man turned away, muttering. But a woman sitting nearby caught Alexander's eye and nodded approvingly. Her silent solidarity carried its own power. Later that night, Alexander paced Daniel's Beacon Hill townhouse, anxiety tightening his chest. The home's elegant simplicity reflected Daniel's aesthetic contemporary furniture against historic architecture, technology seamlessly integrated into century-old spaces. "You built your company from nothing. I won't be the reason you lose contracts or reputation." Daniel stilled Alexander's nervous movement, taking both his hands. The evening light through the tall windows cast his face in gentle shadow. "Before I met you, I'd spent my entire life meeting others' expectations. The perfect son from Greenwich, the Yale graduate, the strategic businessman. With you, I'm finally being myself." His blue eyes held Alexander's gaze. "Do you know how rare that is to be truly seen?" The confession surprised Alexander. "But your confidence, your success, our armor," Daniel finished. "Just like your poetry is yours." Their discussions stretched into dawn, sharing wounds they'd carefully hidden. Alexander revealed the Thanksgiving dinner where his Uncle Chuck, a conservative New Hampshire politician, had suggested he leave his lifestyle at home. The empty chair at the family table the following year. The poems written but never published because they exposed too much truth. Daniel spoke of his failed marriage to Jessica, a relationship founded on family connections and social appearances rather than love, and the divorce that left him questioning his worth beyond his wealth. How his parents still referred to it as that unfortunate misunderstanding, rather than acknowledging the emptiness at its core. In vulnerability, they found common ground, two men who had achieved outward success while inwardly longing for acceptance without conditions. Dawn broke over the Boston skyline, finding them still talking, still discovering the parallel paths that had somehow led them to each other. We often assume that those with privilege or talent are somehow immune to rejection's sting, yet beneath our carefully constructed personas, we all share the same fundamental need to be loved for exactly who we are, without apology or amendment. Summer heat shimmered over Fenway Park as Alexander experienced his first Red Sox game. The stadium vibrated with generations of tradition, fans rising and falling like a single organism with each pitch. Though Alexander had lived in Boston for years, he'd always observed American pastimes from a distance, cultural rituals that had never felt accessible to someone like him. They sat among a sea of red jerseys, surrounded by families and friends that united in passionate devotion to their team. The crack of bat against ball, the collective intake of breath as a player rounded bases, the thunderous cheers and groans. Alexander absorbed it all with the poet's eye for detail. Daniel explained the game's nuances with boyish enthusiasm, their shoulders pressed together in the cramped seats. His knowledge of statistics and history revealed a lifelong passion Alexander hadn't seen before, a reminder that they were still discovering layers to each other. "My father brought me here every summer," Daniel explained between innings. It was the only time he completely relaxed. No business calls, no networking, just us and the game. Alexander understood the significance of Daniel sharing this space, this memory. It was another bridge extending between their worlds. When the kiss cam suddenly projected their faces onto the massive screen, Daniel didn't hesitate. Their kiss lasted mere seconds, met with both cheers and scattered boos. A family with young children nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances, while college students several rows back whooped supportively. By morning, social media buzzed with images of Boston Tech CEO Daniel Fitzgerald's bold statement at Fenway. The backlash arrived with cold efficiency. Midwest Security Solutions, a potential $20 million client from Nebraska, withdrew from contract negotiations, citing misalignment of corporate values. The email's formal language couldn't disguise the obvious reason. Daniel showed Alexander the message without comment, his expression carefully neutral. That evening, Daniel fielded calls from concerned board members and investors. Alexander heard fragments from the next room, reassurances about market diversification, references to untapped progressive markets, firm but polite refusals to issue clarifying statements. Daniel's board meeting the following day stretched for hours behind closed doors, voices occasionally rising through the thick mahogany. Alexander received a text midway through, "They're concerned, I'm not. Perhaps keeping your personal life more private would benefit shareholders," suggested Richardson, the oldest board member. When Alexander met Daniel for dinner afterward, Richardson had spotted them at the restaurant and stopped by their table, his expensive suit and patrician manner embodying old Boston money. "Your stock dropped 3 points today." Daniel's face was drawn, but his voice remained steady. "I built this company on integrity and innovation. If I hide who I am and who I love, what example does that set for our employees who trust us to create an authentic workplace?" He looked directly at Richardson. "And our stock will recover. Our technology speaks for itself." When Richardson departed, Daniel exhaled slowly. "He was my father's friend. Old guard." "Are you worried?" Alexander asked. "About the company?" "No, about changing minds that have been comfortable for 70 years a little." 3 days later, Alexander watched from the crowd as Daniel took the stage at Boston Pride. The man who had once calculated business risks with mathematical precision now stood before thousands in a simple white button-down and rainbow tie. Sunlight gleamed off his dark hair as he approached the microphone, shoulders squared with determination. "Success in business should never require abandoning our authentic selves," Daniel's voice carried across the crowd. "The most innovative solutions come from diverse perspectives, from people who feel safe bringing their whole selves to the table. My company isn't successful despite embracing diversity. We're successful because of it." The crowd's response washed over them in waves of affirmation. Alexander spotted several Fitzgerald Tech employees in company t-shirts, their presence a silent but powerful statement of solidarity. When invited to the Tech for Equality charity event the following week, Alexander surprised himself by accepting the speaking slot. Standing at the podium, The literature professor found himself addressing tech executives about the power of storytelling to change perceptions. Throughout history, literature has given voice to those society pushed to the margin, he said, feeling Daniel's proud gaze from the front row. Technology now amplifies those voices. Together, they're rewriting what's possible. His words resonated in ways he hadn't anticipated. He spoke of Whitman and Baldwin, of words that had sustained him when he felt most alone, of how technology now connected isolated young people to communities that affirmed their existence. The irony wasn't lost on either of them when Apple, Google, and Microsoft representatives approached after the speech, expressing interest in Fitzgerald Tech's security innovations. The contracts they offered dwarfed the one they'd lost. Perhaps authenticity is becoming good business, Alexander observed as they drove home. Daniel's smile was contemplative. It always was. Some companies are just realizing it later than others. Sometimes standing in your truth costs something valuable, but what you gain, integrity, authenticity, unexpected allies, often proves more valuable than what was lost. The courage to live openly doesn't just change your own story, it creates space for others to write theirs. Autumn painted New England in fiery splendor as Alexander's phone illuminated with the message he'd been dreading: his mother's invitation to Thanksgiving dinner in Manchester, New Hampshire. Last year's empty chair at the family table had spoken volumes about where he stood. This year's invitation felt like a fragile bridge extended across a chasm of misunderstanding. The message was typical of his mother: practical, emotionless, focused on logistics. "We're having dinner at 3. Sarah and the kids will be here. Your room is available if you want to stay." No mention of Daniel, no acknowledgement of last year's absence, just the assumption of family obligation that had governed their relationship for decades. Alexander stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it face down on his desk. Through his office window, he could see students crossing the Boston University campus, leaves swirling around their hurried forms. The academic world had provided sanctuary when his family could not, literature offering the acceptance often withheld elsewhere. "I should go alone," Alexander insisted later, fingers nervously adjusting books on his office shelf. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across Boston University's campus outside his window. "It will be easier for everyone." Daniel gently took the book from Alexander's restless hands. "You've faced literary critics, university boards, and my opinionated investors, but your family terrifies you." Alexander couldn't argue. His family home represented the first battlefield where he'd surrendered, accepting silence as the price of belonging, the place where he'd learned to make himself smaller, quieter, less visible. The techniques had served him well in academia, allowing him to observe and analyze from a safe distance, but they had also kept intimacy at bay. "If you go alone, you're accepting their terms," Daniel continued, his voice gentle but firm. "That your relationship, that you should remain separate from family life." Alexander leaned against his desk, suddenly exhausted by the familiar weight of anticipated rejection. "My Uncle Chuck will be there, State Representative Charles Henderson, defender of traditional values." Daniel's smile was steady. "I've handled worse." The drive to Manchester passed through towns where colonial churches stood like sentinels against modern change. Quaint village greens, historic markers, covered bridges, the quintessential New England landscape that tourists photographed but that Alexander associated with confinement rather than charm. His childhood home, a traditional New England colonial with perfectly symmetrical windows, looked exactly as it had when he'd left after college. The same brass knocker gleamed on the front door. The same maple tree dominated the front yard, though its trunk had thickened with the passing years. His mother's embrace felt tentative but genuine. Elizabeth Morgan had aged visibly since he'd last seen her, silver now overtaking the brown in her carefully styled hair. "You look well," she said simply, her eyes flickering briefly to Daniel before she stepped back. His sister Sarah's welcome was warmer, her eyes lighting up at seeing Daniel. "I knew you two would hit it off," she whispered while hugging Alexander, her smile reflecting vindication and genuine happiness. Sarah's children, Emma, 10, and Jacob, 7 regarded them with undisguised curiosity. "Are you Mom's boss?" Jacob asked Daniel directly. "I'm the CEO of the company where she works," Daniel answered, crouching to the boy's level. "But your mom is the expert at her job. I just make sure she has what she needs to do it well." The honest answer seemed to satisfy Jacob, who promptly asked if either of them knew how to play Minecraft. Uncle Chuck's arrival changed the atmosphere like an approaching storm. The New Hampshire state representative carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed tradition and morality were synonymous. His handshake with Daniel was brief, his eyes evaluating. "Fitzgerald, the tech security company." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied with professional courtesy. "Heard you had some stock fluctuations recently." The statement carried subtle accusation. Momentary market adjustment. We're up 12% for the quarter. Daniel's calm response revealed nothing of the battle behind those numbers. Dinner proceeded with careful conversation about safe topics, Sarah's children, local road construction, the Patriots season, until Chuck mentioned the anti-discrimination bill he had recently voted against. "We don't need special protections for lifestyle choices," he stated, cutting into his turkey with precision. "That's the problem with America today. Everyone wants special treatment." The table fell silent. Years of practiced restraint dissolved as Alexander set down his fork. "It's not about special treatment, Uncle Chuck. It's about not being fired, evicted, or denied service because of who you love." His voice remained steady, though his hand trembled slightly. "When I was 17, 3 boys from my high school football team held me down in the locker room and told me people like me shouldn't exist. The bruises healed. The message didn't," he continued, words flowing from a place long sealed away. "I wrote my first poem that night, hidden under blankets with a flashlight. Not because I wanted to be a poet, but because I had no other way to survive what I was feeling." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member. "That's not a lifestyle choice. That's survival." Daniel reached for Alexander's hand across the table, not for Alexander's support, but offering his own. "Love isn't political, Mr. Henderson. It's human. The only choice involved is whether we embrace it or deny it." The silence stretched until Alexander's mother stood suddenly, tears streaming down her face. "I've been silent too long." Her voice wavered but grew stronger with each word. "My son is brilliant, kind, and deserves every happiness. I failed him once by not standing up. Never again." Chuck's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Sarah stepped in. "Uncle Chuck, my children adore their Uncle Alexander, and they're learning that family means supporting each other, especially when we're different from one another." Thanksgiving ended not with perfect resolution, but with the first fragile tendrils of understanding. After dinner, Alexander found his mother in the kitchen, methodically wrapping leftovers. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for not being stronger sooner." Alexander leaned against the counter beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "We're all learning." That night, in his childhood bedroom with its faded posters and bookshelves still lined with classics, Daniel held him close. "Your family is trying," he murmured against Alexander's hair. "That's more than many get." Alexander knew it was true. Not everyone's mind was changed, but hearts had begun to crack open. Our deepest wounds often come from those whose acceptance we crave most. Yet healing begins not when others finally change, but when we find the courage to stand firmly in our truth, even at tables where we were once invisible. Provincetown's harbor glistened under June's sunshine, sailboats dotting the water like confetti against blue. The wedding venue, a historic Cape Cod boathouse restored with modern elegance, overlooked the very shores where America's story began and where Massachusetts had pioneered marriage equality. Alexander and Daniel had chosen this location intentionally, a place where history and future possibility converged. The morning had dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of their union. Alexander stood at the window of their preparation room, watching early beachgoers stroll along the shore. Behind him, Daniel adjusted his tie in the mirror, the quiet intimacy of the moment striking after months of planning and anticipation. "Nervous?" Daniel asked, meeting Alexander's eyes in the reflection. "Grateful," Alexander answered. "I never thought I'd have this." The ceremony space blended New England tradition with personal significance, arrangements of native wildflowers, jazz from Boston's best quartet, and readings from queer poets who had illuminated paths through darker times. Alexander's poetry students had crafted an archway of intertwined verses about love, transcending boundaries, handwritten lines flowing together to form a canopy beneath which they would exchange vows. Sarah served as Alexander's best woman, glowing with happiness and visibly pregnant with her third child. Daniel's college roommate Mark stood beside him, their 30-year friendship a testament to connections that withstand time and change. In the front row, Elizabeth Morgan sat beside Daniel's parents, who had gradually moved from reluctant acceptance to genuine support. When Uncle Chuck appeared at the back of the gathering, Alexander tensed momentarily. But instead of disruption, Chuck carried a gift, an official letter supporting youth protection legislation he had recently co-sponsored as state representative. "I'm still learning," he whispered, awkwardly embracing his nephew. "But I'm trying." The gesture represented more than political evolution. It acknowledged Alexander's humanity in the language Chuck understood: best policy and legislation that would protect others from the pain Alexander had endured. More surprising was the attendance of Richardson, the board member who'd once suggested Daniel keep his personal life private. "The company's stock has risen 20% since you decided to be authentic," he acknowledged, champagne flute in hand during the reception. "Turns out, integrity is good business. I was wrong." Alexander's mother's speech moved many to tears. Standing before the gathered guests, her voice steady and clear, Elizabeth Morgan spoke of transformation. "Love requires courage both to give and receive. My son had that courage long before I did. Today isn't just about two people joining their lives. It's about all of us expanding our understanding of what family means." She looked directly at Alexander as she continued, "I missed too many years being afraid instead of being your mother. I'm learning that love isn't about conditions or expectations. It's about seeing someone completely and celebrating who they are." The reception unfolded beneath string lights and stars, the Atlantic Ocean providing a rhythmic soundtrack. Daniel led Alexander onto the dance floor for their first dance, moving to Ella Fitzgerald's smooth rendition of "At Last." The symbolism wasn't lost on their guests, a classic American love song embracing their modern American love story. During the reception, Daniel and Alexander announced the Fitzgerald Morgan Foundation, dedicated to supporting LGBTQ+ youth rejected by their families. "No young person should face the world alone because of who they love," Daniel explained, his arm around Alexander's waist. "This foundation will provide housing, education, and mental health support for those who need family when their biological families fall short." The announcement received the evening's loudest applause, particularly from Alexander's students present at the celebration. Daniel had privately sold shares worth millions to fund the foundation's endowment, ensuring its sustainability regardless of market fluctuations. The following year would bring Alexander's third poetry collection, American Love Revolution, which would become required reading in literature courses nationwide. Critics would call it a landmark work exploring the intersection of personal identity and national values. But Alexander took most pride in the letters from young readers who found themselves in his words. The most meaningful moment came quietly, 1 year after their wedding. They welcomed 17-year-old Tyler into their home, a talented artist whose conservative family couldn't accept his identity. The legal guardianship process had been complicated, but Daniel's connections and Alexander's university position had helped navigate the system designed to overlook families like theirs. Tyler's bedroom was filled with art supplies, his hesitant smile gradually becoming more frequent as he realized this sanctuary wouldn't be revoked. That Thanksgiving, their Boston dining room filled with a patchwork family of relatives and young people with nowhere else to go. Elizabeth Morgan taught Tyler her secret cranberry sauce recipe, while Chuck engaged in spirited but respectful debate with a 19-year-old sociology major about juvenile justice reform. As Alexander lit the candles, he caught Daniel's gaze across the table, still disbelieving sometimes that they had found each other. that they had built this safe harbor together. The light reflected in Daniel's eyes held the same wonder, the same recognition that what they'd created extended far beyond themselves. Love's revolutionary power lies not just in changing individual hearts, but in reimagining what family can be chosen, extended, unconventional, and utterly genuine. Alexander and Daniel's story wasn't just about two men finding each other. It was about creating space where others could be found as well. What family rejected you, but love found you anyway? What truth about yourself did you finally embrace, despite the world telling you it was wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more journeys of courage, love, and finding family in the most unexpected places.